In the opening scene, young children recount their experiences during the invasion, drawing pictures of their families in the alien airships. Matt, Tom Mason's son, shares with Ann Glass that his mother died during the attacks, and his older brother Ben was taken by the aliens. He shows her a picture of his father and older brother Hal, who are now fighting in the resistance. Meanwhile, Tom and Hal scavenge for food in a dark street, but encounter robotic aliens called mechs who destroy their food supply. They flee as soldiers engage the aliens, but the aliens overpower them, killing the soldiers and destroying their barricade. Tom and Hal seek refuge in an empty store, where they encounter Weaver and other soldiers. As they return to their base, Tom reunites with his sleeping son Matt. Anne informs him about Matt's drawings, which depict the invasion. Tom is then summoned by Colonel Porter for a meeting. Porter outlines his plan to evade the aliens' detection by splitting their brigade into smaller groups. Weaver is appointed as leader of the second mass, with Tom as his second-in-command. The next day, the fighters and civilians set out, searching for food in nearby stores, but come up empty-handed. Weaver decides they can't risk returning for more supplies due to their large numbers. However, Tom volunteers to lead a smaller group back. Weaver assigns 6 fighters and a pickup truck to Tom's team, including Hal, Karen, Di, Anthony, Click, and Jimmy. Hal and Karen break off from the group to scout for aliens and come across mechs accompanied by harnessed children, including Hal's brother Ben. Hal rushes back to inform Tom, and despite their joy at the news, Tom insists they stick to the mission. Hal disagrees and attempts to go after Ben, but Tom convinces him to stay focused. The group discovers a supply store with food and cautiously loads it into the truck while keeping watch for aliens. Suddenly, Hal is attacked by a skidder, an 8-limbed creature, prompting Tom to open fire. Hal flees as a mech approaches Tom, but Hal intervenes, drawing the mech's attention away. Tom uses C4 to destroy the mech while Di shoots the wounded skidder, allowing the group to observe it before it dies. Upon returning, Tom reports their success to Weaver, and then insists that he and Hal must search for Ben. Weaver initially declines, prioritizing a raid on the armory for weapons. Tom agrees, but insists they will search for Ben afterward. As the second mass prepares to leave the city, Hal gives Matt a ripstick as a birthday gift, pretending it's from Tom. The children play with the gift as the adults watch, and Weaver signals that it's time to depart. They set out on foot, determined to find Ben and confront the alien invaders. At the armory, Tom and the others cautiously approach, checking for any signs of alien presence. Hal throws a tennis ball towards the entrance to distract any potential threats, using the dog with them to fetch it. The dog moves forward, barking, and suddenly a mech emerges. Jimmy quickly stops it from attacking the dog, but their cover is compromised, forcing them to move before the mech can retaliate. The next morning, Tom updates Weaver on the events from the previous night, and Weaver instructs him to try again that evening. During this, Anne voices her concerns to Weaver about the living arrangements, where civilians are intense while fighters occupy houses. Anne sees this as unfair, but Weaver argues that the soldiers need proper rest. Anne and Tom then discuss the divide between civilians and the military, observing Uncle Scott teaching biology to the children. Later, Uncle Scott shares his observations with Tom about the aliens. He notes that while human-made robots resemble humans, the mechs and skidders have distinct differences. Meanwhile, Karen talks to Hal about another girl's intentions, but Hal brushes off her concerns and kisses Karen. Tom interrupts, reminding Hal of their upcoming return to the armory. Later that night, the group prepares for their mission, and Jimmy is disappointed when Click is chosen to go in his place. At the armory, Click is fatally shot by 2 arrows, but not by aliens. Rather, they're ambushed by a group of outlaws led by John Pope. The outlaws capture the group and take them to an auditorium where they tie them up. Pope interrogates them, and Tom answers his questions. When Pope threatens Tom with a gun, Hal offers to help them acquire weapons from the second mass. Margaret, a member of Pope's gang, takes Hal aside and gives him an hour to retrieve the guns. During their conversation, Tom realizes that Pope is a skilled fighter. He asks for a beer, which Pope gives him, noticing Tom's interest in his brother's sidearm. Tom confronts him, asking, "What would you do?" During this, Hal returns to inform Weaver of the situation. Weaver refuses to negotiate with Pope and orders Mike to take Hal as a prisoner. However, Mike allows Hal to leave, and on his way, Hal encounters Anne, who offers her help. They return together and find Margaret, who escorts them back to Pope. Once they reach, Anne offers assistance in treating Pope's wounded brother Billy. After bandaging his leg, Pope leaves Billy, Cuball, and Margaret in charge of the prisoners, while he and the other outlaws attempt to raid the second mass. Pope signals the alien airships with a flare, forcing Weaver to surrender food and ammunition. Back at Pope's base, tensions rise as Margaret kills Billy and Cuball after an altercation. She then releases the hostages. As Pope's group loads up their car, Tom and the militia open fire, killing some of Pope's men. Tom offers Pope a choice: join them or face death. Pope refuses and waits for the alien attack. When the airship arrives, Pope drives away, abandoning his men to be killed. Weaver, however, captures Pope and holds him at gunpoint. The next day, Weaver discusses the events with Tom and then hands Pope over to him. Tom puts Pope in custody and then joins Matt for a game of catch. Afterward, Tom, Hal, Karen, Di, Anthony, and Margaret set out to search for Ben at a local hospital. Dr. Michael Harris proposes a plan to save the abducted teenagers, but Tom becomes preoccupied with unanswered questions about the invasion. During the rescue mission, the second mass encounters skitters and mechs. Mike becomes fixated on rescuing his son and deviates from the mission to find Ben. Despite the diversion, Tom helps rescue Rick successfully, but is knocked out by a mech missile while trying to locate Ben. Hal and Karen are left behind as the group flees with Rick. When Tom regains consciousness and learns about Hal and Karen, he is furious. Tom heads back to the hospital alone, but encounters a skitter in a tunnel. Following Pope's advice, he disables the skitter and brings it back to the school as a prisoner of war. Determined to reunite with his sons in the Scout, Tom returns to the hospital. Hal witnesses harnessed children, including his brother Ben, being led away by a mech. Despite his efforts to pursue them, he is immobilized by the mech's light. He witnesses the horrifying sight of the mech executing harnessed children under the command of a skitter. Meanwhile, at the school, Dr. Harris and Dr. Glass prepare to remove the harness from Rick. Dr. Harris explains his theory about the needles synthesizing a drug and proposes a method to remove them without causing shock. They begin the procedure, but Rick experiences complications and is sedated. Tom encounters Hal near the hospital and learns about the tragic events. Hal blames Tom for leaving him behind, but Tom explains the alien's message and resolves to rescue all the abducted children despite the risks. As Captain Weaver observes the captive skitter being locked in a cage, Commander Porter arrives and emphasizes the importance of studying it. He announces that Dr. Harris will remain with the second mass for a few more weeks to study the captured skitter. Meanwhile, the Pope prepares a meal, hoping to prove himself to the second mass, but receives less praise than he anticipated. Weaver acknowledges Pope's potential, but insists on keeping him under close supervision for now. When Tom returns, he finds Rick stabilized but still unconscious. While Anne suggests cleaning him up and discussing the events, Tom is more concerned about finding Harris. He locates Harris drinking in front of the captive skitter, feeling disgruntled and pessimistic. Tom confronts Harris about leaving Rebecca Mason behind, to which Harris reluctantly admits, justifying his actions by claiming he believed he could be more useful than Rebecca. Tom, realizing the potential impact of Rebecca's sacrifice on saving Ben, puts up a picture of Ben among the missing children. Meanwhile, we see Rick and the skitter in the operating room, both suddenly opening their eyes simultaneously. As Anne and Dr. Harris attempt to communicate with the skitter prisoner, Weaver assigns Tom and Hal on a mission to acquire more drugs needed for the kids undergoing harness removal operations. Pope suggests raiding a nearby motorcycle dealership to transport the drugs, and reluctantly Tom agrees to let Pope join the mission. While Anne tries to establish communication with the skitter using images of Earth and the galaxy, Harris takes a more aggressive approach by showing the captive skitter a dead skitter's corpse. Matt notices a burst of static on the radio, indicating some activity. During the mission to the motorcycle dealership, the team encounters a nest of sleeping skitters under a bridge. Pope suggests attacking them, but Tom opts to bypass the nest to avoid drawing attention. Later, as they explore the bike store, Pope detonates explosives near the Skitter nest, attracting the attention of armed harnessed teens. Tom refuses to engage in combat with the kids and manages to escape with the team, although Di is injured in the process. While fleeing on a motorcycle, they encounter the Skitter controlling the harnessed teens. Tom and Di kill it but leave the motionless kids behind for another time. Meanwhile, Rick regains consciousness, but when Mike tries to communicate with him, Rick claims not to recognize his father. Mike, frustrated, confronts the Skitter, demanding answers about why the kids were chosen and why Rick was cured. When the Skitter remains silent, Mike threatens it with a rifle, causing the alien to collapse. At the same time, Matt and Scott pick up more static on their radios. As Harris and Ann attempt to decipher the alien's communication method, they perform an autopsy on the dead Skitter, but find no conclusive evidence due to the advanced state of decay. Meanwhile, the captive Skitter wakes Ricky and convinces him to put the harness back on. The Skitter communicates through Ricky, pleading to be freed and later asking to be killed. Mike, infuriated, removes the harness from Ricky's back. After returning from the mission, Tom and Weaver discuss their findings. Tom suggests that the harnessed teens were used as a psychological weapon against them, indicating a human-like strategic understanding by the Skitters. Tom reaffirms his determination to rescue Ben and the other kids, and Weaver grants permission, empathizing with Tom's situation. Maggie approaches Tom later, suggesting an alternative solution to the drug shortage. At dinner, the group consumes bread left by the Pope, and Lourdes leads a prayer. Hal and Maggie return from their scouting mission with a bag full of pharmaceuticals, providing much-needed supplies for the medical ward. Tom is eager to ensure the drugs are ready for use by the following night when they plan to rescue the harnessed kids. Anne reminds Tom that the procedure falls under Dr. Harris's expertise and emphasizes the need for realistic expectations, including the possibility of failure. The next morning, Tom discusses their rescue plan with Weaver, who identifies flaws in the strategy. Hal offers his own suggestion to keep the Skitter asleep while they approach, then kill it while unconscious. In the medical ward, tensions rise as Dr. Harris and Ann disagree on the treatment of the captive Skitter. Some civilians express concern about keeping the alien alive on campus, including a pregnant woman named Sarah. Meanwhile, Scott makes progress in understanding Skitter communication, discovering their use of radio waves. Tom and Hal practice archery with Maggie's guidance, while Dr. Harris observes changes in the imprisoned Skitter's behavior. Anne confronts her denial about her son's disappearance, as Weaver intervenes to prevent panic over Dr. Harris's death at the hands of the Skitter. Hal proposes a daring plan to infiltrate the hospital with a harnessed Ricky, while Anne tests the theory of silently killing a Skitter. After successful confirmation, the team prepares for their risky mission to rescue the harnessed children. After Anne kills the Skitter, she is overwhelmed by emotions and admits to using her family as motivation during the act. She reveals her reluctance to post any representation of her son, Sam, on the missing persons board due to the lack of physical mementos. In a moment of anger and grief, she wipes the Skitter's blood onto the board, symbolizing her loss. During the rescue mission, tension mounts as Hal, disguised with a harness, infiltrates the hospital alone. Tom anxiously waits for Hal's signal, while Maggie guides him through the hospital's layout. Inside, Hal initiates an attack on the Skitter guarding the harnessed children, prompting Tom and Maggie to join the fray and lead the children out of the building. Anne performs the harness removal surgery on Ben and the other children, using a blowtorch to remove the needles. Despite her efforts, one child succumbs to withdrawal symptoms. However, Ben successfully undergoes surgery, bringing relief to his family and friends. Hal learns about Maggie's past battle with cancer, explaining her knowledge of pharmaceuticals and hospitals. Tom expresses pride in Hal's bravery and maturity as they await Ben's recovery. At a baby shower for Sarah, Anne receives support from the other women, while Tom, Hal, and Matt gather around Ben's bedside. Weaver observes the scene, reflecting on the reunion of Tom with all his children. Tom comforts Anne, acknowledging her pivotal role in saving the harnessed children. As he holds her hands, Ben wakes up, symbolizing hope and renewal for the group.